Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and now of Sports Info Solutions, joined by Aaron Schatz, the godfather of football analytics and the founder of Football Outsiders. And as always, our producer, Justin Stein, is with us. Well, I shouldn't say as always. We missed you last week, Justin, but we're glad to have you back. Aaron, let's get right into it. We've got a packed wild card weekend, 6 games.
Super wild card weekend, they're calling it. From now on, it's not going to be wild card weekend. It's going to be super wild card weekend.
Which telecast will you be watching for the CBS, Nickelodeon? I'm all Nickelodeon.
I think for the sake of my brain not being on acid, I'm going to watch the CBS telecast.
That's an interesting choice, not being on acid. All right, we'll see how that works out for you.
Yeah, I'm going to avoid the slime.
All right, let's get right into the games, though. We'll go through them in chronological order. First up, the number 7 seed Colts, who snuck into the playoffs with the Dolphins, lost to the number 2 Bills, now travel to face the number 2 Bills. What are you looking forward to in this one?
An interesting thing about this game, Buffalo is definitely the better team. For those who haven't seen yet, Buffalo finished the season number 1 in weighted DVOA, which gives more strength to recent games. They have been over 40% in 6 of their last 7 games, which is pretty remarkable. And their defense is hot. It's 7th in the league since week 10. Indianapolis, on the other hand, this is really interesting. Their offense and defense have switched places. We heard so much about their defense in the first half of the year, but their defense was 3rd in the first half of the year, has only been 14th in the second half of the year, while their offense has improved from 22nd to 7th.
Interesting. I would not have expected that, but that does kind of go to show that the Bills, if you look for one area slowing down the offense, that doesn't bode well. That the Colts defense hasn't been playing as well. Still should be an interesting matchup though, with that zone going up against the Buffalo passing game, because it's going to be all on Josh Allen. It's not going to be the man coverage matchups that he'll get them few and far between, but not too often. You'll expect to see that zone, so it's really going to be on him to see if he can pick them apart. He's been outstanding against zone all year.
I keep thinking back to 2 weeks ago against Pittsburgh, when Pittsburgh was throwing all of that short stuff and getting nothing out of it in the first half. And Roethlisberger finally started going downfield in the second half, and they had success. And the Colts ranked 6th in DVOA against short passes, but 22nd against deep passes. And I do believe that Josh Allen can throw deep, and he's got Stephon Diggs and healthy John Brown. So I think that they can throw deep on this. I mean, the goal of the zone is to keep everything in front of you, but receivers are able to get behind the Colts.
I mean, you said it. Number 1 in weighted DVOA right now. The Bills have just been playing outrageous. I think going into the season, when we looked at the Bills and we examined this team, we thought this is a defense that's really strong. They really were great last year. They've, as you mentioned, strengthened us. They've kind of gone throughout the year this year. You've seen them kind of get healthier, and they're really playing well in a lot of ways. And then you flip it on the offensive side of the ball. I think early in the year, there were some questions about the run game, which was the total opposite of what we expected. We thought they would run the ball, have a good offensive line, and we wouldn't be sure about the passing game. But Stephon Diggs totally changed their whole receiving corps, and Josh Allen has proved to everybody wrong. I wanted to give just my quick take on the Josh Allen. I think we might be going through something like we did with Russell Wilson a few years ago. Before Russell Wilson, maybe there's not just a one-person turning point, but let's use him as that figure. Before Russell Wilson, there was a real QB height. We got to be careful about short quarterbacks. We're not so sure about it. And I think he made people kind of go back and reevaluate things and what they look at. This is like maybe almost the total opposite thing. It's not QB height. It's quarterbacks that have size, arm strength, athleticism, but maybe some questions about how they process. People talk about accuracy a lot. I don't think it's accuracy per se so much as a processing question. Allen certainly had accuracy problems, but I don't know that anybody ever questioned his arm talent. The ability to complete passes consistently, I think that was certainly there. But I think that probably really came back to the processing that you never really saw him do, even against Wyoming competition. And a guy that I would throw in this kind of Josh Allen mold is Justin Herbert this year. Another guy, size, arm strength, plenty of accuracy in terms of his arm talent went, but it was the processing question again. And maybe just like a few years ago when we had this reckoning about maybe we shouldn't just disqualify these quarterbacks because of their height. I can't believe it, but we might need to reevaluate whether or not we should disqualify quarterbacks based on their processing ability that they demonstrated in the lower levels, because there are examples now of big body, big armed, athletic guys. And what we used to think wasn't teachable, maybe now is a little bit more teachable.
Yeah, it's possible. I'd like to see some more examples of it before. Herbert is a different cat than Allen because of the accuracy thing.
The accuracy is different between them. They both had processing questions, but the accuracy in terms of when he was aiming at his target, that wasn't a question for Herbert.
What people mostly were criticizing about Allen was the accuracy more than the processing. So it's the accuracy improvement that I think is a little bit of right now, like a black swan event. Like, I've never seen another quarterback improve accuracy like this. And now every big-armed quarterback who's inaccurate, we're going to be hearing, well, what about Josh Allen? Well, what about Josh Allen? I'd like to see a couple more of them improve it in the NFL before we start saying that this is something that's going to happen all the time. But as far as processing being taught, yeah, that might be more something that it turns out you can teach in the NFL.
Well, yeah, you can't go ahead and say like, oh, Russell Wilson's good. Now, if there's a guy that's 5'11", we're just going to draft him because he's short, right? You need to have the other things. So I don't think Drew Lock automatically becomes I don't think Drew Lock has the athleticism that these guys have. I think that's part of the calculus of what's changed here is the way it changes your box count numbers. It changes the way you run your running game, and that changes the way teams have to defend you in the passing game. You force teams to play single high, basically. It makes your job easier. Maybe if the teams can't play with two high safeties, then I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily true either, that they can't play with two high safeties.
I mean, you can against Buffalo. Their running game is not dangerous enough, and Allen doesn't take the ball on called runs enough to worry. I'd rather play zone, and because I'm more worried about Josh Allen scrambling than Josh Allen on designed runs.
Yeah, and that's a good transition back into this game. I wanted to mention that there because this offseason, I really am – I agree with you. I don't want to go so far as to forget all of the examples of big quarterbacks that stink, big armed, big body quarterbacks that never could process and never learned how to process. But I am interested in kind of seeing if there is something to it. You could throw even like Jalen Hurts in the category of a guy like this that I think has had a little bit. I don't think he's been great, but he's had some more success than probably I would have thought from the beginning.
Well, let's see what he does over more than a couple of games.
Absolutely. I don't know if he's the guy. All right. Anyway, back to this game. You were talking about Allen and going up against that zone. I think that one thing that could be the great equalizer here is the AFC Defensive Player of the Month, DeForest Buckner. If he can play in the backfield, if he can really get into the paint against Josh Allen, I could see that being one thing. You know, for all of what Josh Allen has done this year, I still really do want to see him prove it over a playoff run. This is, on paper, a tough defensive matchup. Maybe, like you're saying, he can get the ball down the field. If the Colts defensive line can put it upon themselves to not give them the time to get all this down the field, you're going up against a tough offensive line there. But that's where I'm going to have my eyes focused on DeForest Buckner early in the game.
I'm more worried about Buckner in the running game. Let me point out first downs. Buffalo's offense, first in DVOA passing, 29th running. The Colts defense only 17th against the pass, but 4th against the run. Don't just give the ball to Devin Singletary on first down. Let Allen sling it on first down.
I think that they will. That's probably why Dable's going to get it, maybe his choice of head coaching jobs. All right, moving into the afternoon, 4:40 p.m. on the East Coast. But this game will be played on the West Coast. Number 6, the LA Rams at the number 3 Seahawks. We've seen this game twice already this year. It looks like Goff will play, given that he's practicing so far this week. What are you looking forward to in this one?
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was going to be Wolford for most of the week. Now it's, I guess, more likely to be Goff, but not at 100%. The thing I keep pointing out is that the narrative about the Seattle Seahawks is more true about the Rams than it is about the Seahawks. So Seattle has gone from 3rd on offense and 19th on defense in the first half of the year to 10th in both areas in the second half of the year, right? So defense improves, offense declines. Los Angeles has gone from 5th on offense and 8th on defense to 20th on offense, but 1st on defense. So as much as the Seahawks have improved on defense, the Rams have improved even more. As much as the Seahawks have declined on offense, the Rams have declined even more. However, I will say they had their worst offensive game of the year in week 17 and their second worst offensive game of the year in week 16. But Part of that was Cam Akers came back from injury, clearly still hurt in week 17 and was terrible. Part of it was missing Cooper Kupp. So they will have Cooper Kupp back for this game.
Yep, the Cooper Kupp might be just as important as Jared Goff playing. Usually, we're all about quarterbacks around here, but that's absolutely huge given what he means to their offense in both the passing game and the running game. I think he's a really kind of unique player.
Seattle 30th in DVOA against passes up the middle, which is not a good weakness to have against Cooper Kupp.
I would agree with that. I had some stats that I pulled that kind of go into what you were saying about how this is really flipped from early in the year. We thought this was Seahawks great on offense, bad on defense, and now they're kind of more even, and the Rams have actually flipped to being a team that can't get it done on offense and has been as strong as anybody on defense. So Goff, in the last two games that he did play, uneven second half of the season, we all know that, -3 total points in each of the last two times that he did play, including week 16 in Seattle. And as we expected in that one, the Seahawks were in cover 3 the majority of the time. Now, we retract this through each of their matchups throughout the year. We said early in the year, Goff has been good against cover 3. Will Seattle stay with their bread and butter? Seattle stayed with their bread and butter, and Goff did pretty well against it. Second matchup, we said we got to expect that the Seahawks will stay in their cover 3 more. They did, and Goff was bad in that game. So 32 out of 52 dropbacks, the Seahawks were in cover 3. Goff was just 15 for 25 for 162 yards and an interception against it. And then when we look at from the beginning half of the year to the second half of the year, EPA agrees with DVOA. Over the course of the year, the Seattle pass defense is 22nd in total EPA. They've given up 40 expected points added, more than an average team. However, over the second half of the year, they're up to 9th, giving up 12 expected points added, less than an average defense. That included sharpening their cover 3, where they've also been in the top 10. Now, coming back over to the Rams, here's your twist that goes back to what you were saying about their defense. Over the second half of the year, the Rams have been the best cover 3 team in the league. They've saved 33 expected points added just in cover 3 since week 9. So for all of the narratives and the way that we think about these two teams, we really do need to flip it on its head to understand the matchup that we're really going to see in this one.
And I will also say, given the quality of Jalen Ramsey and Darius Williams, it would be good for Seattle to have a big game from third receiver David Moore.
You know what I haven't heard people talking about this year is how Aaron Donald is bad at run defense. Where did that narrative go? I don't remember. All right, let's keep it going to the night game on Saturday night at 8:15 p.m. It'll be number 5 Tampa Bay at number 4 Washington. Much to my chagrin, the football team gets a home game, but DVOA has this as a mismatch, the number 2 team against the number 16 team.
And the worst offense to ever make the playoffs. The Washington offense is finished last in the league this year. Worst offense to ever make the playoffs. Actually have a lower rating in Alex Smith starts than they do in other games because the quarterback who was better this year for them was Kyle Allen, right? Haskins was terrible, Allen was reasonable, and Smith is somewhere in the middle. So I love the upfront matchups in this game. Washington's defensive line against the Tampa Bay offensive line is fantastic to watch. Chase Young against Tristan Wirfs on the right side, where if it wasn't for Herbert and Justin Jefferson, Wirfs might actually get Offensive Rookie of the Year votes, but Chase Young is going to be Defensive Rookie of the Year. On the other side, Donovan Smith, who does blow some blocks against Montez Sweat. The problem is, how does Washington score?
Right.
So I actually have an answer for that. The one way I think Washington can really move the ball. Terry McLaurin is by far their most dangerous receiver. Slot corner Sean Murphy-Bunting for Tampa Bay, 76th in yards per pass and 75th in success rate in the SIS charting. So Washington must target Sean Murphy-Bunting, put McLaurin in the slot, target Murphy-Bunting. Maybe that moves the ball. Maybe that gets them enough offense because their defense can neutralize the Tampa offense. But how do they score against the Tampa defense?
I'm with you. You look at it on paper, and if you start with Tom Brady against the Washington defense, you think, oh, okay, they've got these defensive ends. They've got the defensive line. They don't need to blitz to get pressure on him. Maybe this is the makeup of a defense that can frustrate Brady. But I think on the other side that this is Brady's team now, not Arians' team. And Brady knows that he needs to just not lose the game. So I think Brady really takes a Belichickian approach to this one, and he understands that offensively he needs to protect the football because short of what you're saying, if McLaurin can have a day against Murphy-Bunting and somehow they can put up how many points can you get based on that? 20, 21? Like, how many points can the Redskins, the Washington football team, legitimately score? I think it's really hard to imagine. The other thing you look at, okay, maybe we've seen poor division winners before with losing records go in and have the home field advantage, and maybe that makes a difference. Home field advantage has been virtually non-existent this year, right? I think it's just 2 games over 500 for home teams this year.
I think it ended up 1 game under 500 for home teams. Home teams were 127, 128, and 1.
Unbelievable. So it's literally non-existent, the home field advantage. So it's hard to think of the way, even though that Washington defense, by the way, and I know they have some named players like Chase Young and Sweat, but if there's ever been a team that deserves the moniker the no-name defense, is it not the Washington football team?
I don't think people can name a lot of even I'm thinking right now of who.
Well, they don't have a team name is where I'm going with this.
Yeah, but can you name their players on defense other than the defensive line?
Fuller is a great corner for them, but linebackers, no.
Yeah. I mean, I know most of the starters on most of the teams in the NFL, and I'm sitting here kind of thinking, oh, yeah, who does start for them? Like Kendall Fuller at cornerback?
Yeah, he had a great year. They moved him from the slot to play on the outside, and he took to the change. So it's been good for him.
Yeah, I don't remember the names of a lot of their players either. So they definitely are a no-name defense after that defensive line.
The football team. That's we'll be surprised if we're talking about them next week. But crazier things have happened.
Yes, like Seattle beating New Orleans 10 years ago. Crazier things have happened.
Keep mentioning it. Let's keep talking about it.
The Off the Charts Football Podcast is free, and if you like free stuff, you should check out SISDataHub.com, our free football advanced stats website. SISDataHub.com has a brand new Game Logs feature, where you can see a selection of advanced stats for each player, game by game. This includes our flagship metric, total points. Now you can see how well players have performed at earning points for their teams in individual games over the past 5 NFL seasons. The free SISDataHub.com is your source for the most accurate and objective football analytics in NFL history. The new game logs are just one of many planned improvements as we roll out new features. Check out SISDataHub.com today and tweet us at sportsinfo_SIS to let us know what you think.
Sunday, 1 p.m., probably the game of the weekend on paper. Number 5, Baltimore Ravens at the number 4 Titans. A rematch of last year's playoff game where the Titans knocked the Ravens off, and a rematch from earlier this season where it was the Titans over the Ravens, I believe, in overtime. In both cases, just Derrick Henry eventually was too much. What are you looking forward to on Sunday?
I want to point out a couple of different things here. First of all, Tennessee last year had such a huge gap between their performance with play action and their performance without play action. And we wrote about it in the Football Outsiders Almanac about how this could not continue. This had to regress. Nope, it totally continued because Tennessee runs more play action than any other team in the league, and they have the biggest gap in the league, 9.4 yards per pass with play action, 6.0 yards per pass without play action.
Well, hold on. Can we just stop there for a second? Because it almost sounds to me like having Derrick Henry makes it harder to play against play action if you're playing linebacker or you're a defensive team going against them. I know that there's been it's been hard to prove
the problem is we can't prove with any other running back that causes. I think it's more that Arthur Smith's play designs are fantastic, but
I think there's definitely a marriage there. Yeah,
it would definitely be a point in favor of the idea that the better running backs does actually help play action because Henry is the best runner in the league, and Tennessee is ridiculous with play action.
For me, this is one of these things that's like proving that clutch exists in sports, where it's going to be really hard to ever prove it. But I think it's also going to be really hard to explain to people that believe that they know it and that they've seen it, that it doesn't exist. And
well, my belief is that clutch does exist in the past.
Right.
That it's not predictive, but it exists in the past, and it should be discussed in like Hall of Fame discussions. Like some players absolutely were in the past more clutch.
They played better at higher leverage moments. Yep.
Yeah. It doesn't mean they're going to be in the future.
That's a pretty interesting one. I like that. All right, let's come back to the game.
Baltimore against Tennessee a few weeks ago was missing Brandon Williams and Calais Campbell. That's a big deal against Derrick Henry.
And the whole team was coming off a COVID outbreak.
Yeah, and they do have those guys back in this game. But I will point out Baltimore, and some of this is the COVID outbreak on defense, but their offense, everybody knows, is kind of hitting on all cylinders right now. Absolutely. It's gone from 21st in the first half of the year to 6th in the second half of the year. Their defense has declined. Their defense has gone from 5th in the first half of the year to 18th in the second half of the year. Now, some of that is the missing Williams and Calais Campbell for a couple of games, but overall, their defense is just not playing as well as it did early in the season.
Staying on the Ravens side of things, I was surprised to read in the DVOA column that the Ravens had the best point differential in the league. We all know the regular season they had last year, it kind of felt like a down regular season for them. And yet here they are with 12 Pythagorean wins, I think, according to Football Outsiders.
Yep, they had the best point differential in the league. They're 7th in DVOA, which means that that's the lowest DVOA ever for a team that led the league in point differential. And if you asked which team would lead the league in point differential, a lot of people would think it was Kansas City. Other people might say New Orleans or Green Bay. I don't think anybody would guess Baltimore, but it was Baltimore.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have guessed that one. I do look at this one as with the Ravens playing, just being a much healthier team, and then flipping it around, the workload that Derrick Henry has gotten. I'm kind of concerned a little bit about the Titans and how sustainable their strategy is. I know they've been beating people up, and I think they kind of have to. I think their defense is so bad that their only way to hang in games defensively is to not play defense as much as they possibly can by keeping the ball in Derrick Henry's hands. But this is like a 1990s style workload for 2 seasons in a row. And with the Ravens, I think potentially having managed things better to this point, for me, I look at the Ravens and I think it's hard for me to picture is happening a third time in a row where just they get bludgeoned by Derrick Henry. I kind of like the way this one matches up for the Ravens.
Yeah, I think it's pretty close. I kind of like the Titans, but I agree with you about the workload. I didn't think we were ever going to see a running back go over 370 carries in a season again. And Derrick Henry did it this year, and I'm kind of shocked.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I guess he got taken care of, so no reason from his perspective not to.
Yeah, we'll have to see about, my famous curse of 370, which was never, the idea was never once you pass 370 carries, like that's a hard and fast lie. But I think there's no question, like, Derrick Henry was a little overused this year, and I wonder what that means in the future, not necessarily this year's playoffs, next year.
Yep. We've been doing a lot of work on injury projections and injury risk this year. And I'll tell you one thing that's for certain. When we arrive on our finalized model, the workload that you had is going to be a really important thing towards predicting your likelihood of injury at the running back position. There's nuance around that, but that aspect's inevitable, which is very different than what we learned about quarterbacks, for example, which is quarterbacks running the ball on a designed run is not such a crazy thing compared to quarterbacks getting hit in the pocket, which is much more of a predictor of injury. All right. The battle of my 2 former bosses at 4:40 p.m. on Sunday, the number 7 Bears led by Ryan Pace versus the number 2 Saints led by Mickey Loomis. I'm probably the only person that looks at the game that way. But another DVOA mismatch here. The number 1 DVOA Saints versus the number 15 Bears. What do you make of it?
Line mismatch. It was at 9.5. It might be up to 10.5 in some places now. Yeah. The offense has definitely improved for Chicago in the last few weeks, but the defense has actually declined. They've gone from 4th in the first half of the year to 21st in the second half. And pass defense has gone from 3rd to 28th. And it's mostly because of 2 games against the Packers where Aaron Rodgers just absolutely destroyed them. But Detroit also passed the ball all over the field against the Bears. So, I think the Saints are a really well-rounded team. Everybody knows I'm driving the Saints bandwagon this year. My numbers love the Saints. The Bears are a 500 team, barely got into the playoffs. I really like the Saints. And finally, the Saints to not have a horrible, terribly bad luck close loss in the playoffs. Finally win one here.
Yeah, with the Saints just being so far improved on defense, and being able to marry that with Sean Payton and Drew Brees on offense, who, despite Drew Brees aging, they still just have a command of offensive football, and they have some other weapons that they can work with there, and a great offensive line. I don't think it's a surprise that you see Jeff Ireland and Terry Fontenot both having GM opportunities that are coming up because of this one. Here, we talked about home field advantage this year and how meaningless it's been. This is the one game where, because of Drew Brees specifically and the difference between being outside in Chicago and being in that dome field advantage, I think that might be worth like 10 points, honestly, in this one. If you put this game in Chicago, if you set the line at Saints by 2 or 3, I would kind of understand it. With this game in New Orleans, it feels like a 2-touchdown game.
Yeah, as much as I'm driving with Saints bandwagon, I'm a little scared about Drew Brees in Lambeau Field. But for now, I'm driving the bandwagon. I will give Chicago this one strength they do have. Number 2 in the league against running backs as receivers, which is a good strength to have against Alvin Kamara. But I think, Michael Thomas should be back. Kamara should be back. I just don't see Chicago moving the ball very much against the Saints defense. This is very similar to Tampa Bay, Washington, in that, I think the Chicago can limit the New Orleans offense somewhat, but I don't think they can move the ball much against the New Orleans defense.
Right. Two of these middling teams, Washington and the Bears, 15 and 16 in DVOA, they're in the playoffs because of their defenses, both of them. So I'm with you there. They might find a way, but they're playing against complete teams, which makes it a lot harder. All right, going to the evening game, back to a little bit more of a more interesting one on paper. 8:15 p.m. on Sunday, we'll wrap up the weekend with the number 6 Browns at the number 3 Steelers. This is a rematch of last week's game, but it'll be completely different than last week's game. I think this is close to a pick-em on paper. If Stefanski was going to be there, what the heck do you make of the impact of Stefanski being out?
I have a belief that missing Joel Bitonio at left guard is a bigger deal than missing Stefanski.
The longest tenured Brown.
Alex Van Pelt knows how to call the plays. I think their aggressiveness on 4th down is an organizational decision that the new coach, the special teams coordinator, whose name escapes me right now,
Pfeiffer, I think.
He will continue. I think the team will be prepared and ready, but missing Bitonio is really big. And the fact is, while Pittsburgh looks like they're primed to be upset because they've declined in the second half of the year, Cleveland is just not that great. Like, their offense was kept down by the couple of early season blowouts. Like I talked about, if you take out the blowouts from early in the season, the Cleveland offense is pretty good. But despite the presence of Myles Garrett, their defense is not good. And Olivier Vernon is now out for the year, so there's nobody on the other side of Myles Garrett. So I like Pittsburgh in this one. Although, there's some really great, Pittsburgh is fabulous at pass pressure and Cleveland is great at pass blocking. So there's some really nice interesting trench matchups here. But I think in the end, Pittsburgh is the better team, and they should win this one.
I think you make a great point there about Bitonio. He's going to make it much more difficult for the Browns offensively we know how good that Steelers defense is. I think everything comes back to the same thing we saw in Week 16 with Ben. Is it going to be the Ben that we saw in the first half of Week 16, the Ben that we saw for most of the second half of the season, who was throwing the ball no more than 3 yards down the field, physically looked like a shell of himself out there? Or can he be the guy that pushed the ball down the field in the second half of that game? Maybe the week off bodes well for him. Maybe he's feeling a little bit fresher out there. And I'm sure he's going to be happy that Olivier Vernon's not on the other side coming after him, because that certainly clears out a weakness for them. But, man, for me, it just comes down to which Ben are we going to see. And for me, that's a flip of a coin.
Yeah, I will say the Pittsburgh offense passing the ball, 22nd on first down, 24th on second down, 9th on third down. So while they get into some third and long situations because they run those short crosses early on that don't go anywhere, or their running game isn't going anywhere this year, like Roethlisberger's been able to get them out of that somewhat. So I think their offense is a little underrated in that it's bad, but people think it's horrible. Like it's bad, but it's not horrible. Like they'll move the ball somewhat. The Cleveland is not a good defense.
Just thinking about the Pittsburgh passing game and looking forward, I think Deontay Johnson is a really interesting player going forward. He's been somebody that has all kinds of athleticism, can get open, but has had all kinds of drops issues this year. Everybody knows about that.
Right, and drops are mostly inconsistent from year to year, so it's going to be interesting to see, like, does this become a continuing issue, or is it, like, inconsistent from year to year? And next year, we're all like, Deontay Johnson, look how amazing he is.
I think he's going to be Nelson Aguilar in people's fantasy leagues next year. I think he's that type of player where, yeah, he might have those drops from time to time, but there's explosiveness that you can't ignore. All right, let's sign off and get out of here. Thank you to all of the listeners. To support the show, please keep the 5-star reviews coming in and helping more people find the podcast. You can also find us on Twitter. You can follow him at FO_A Schatz. You can find me at Matt Mano. We're also on Instagram and YouTube. Search for Sports Info Solutions. And FootballOutsiders.com has tons of great content besides the DVOA article that we just mentioned. What else can the people find?
Lots of Buffalo Bills coverage this week. Buffalo Bills, both in our offensive line column, Word of Mouth, and in Film Room. And there'll be big, long playoff preview articles on Friday morning.
That is awesome. The Bills Bonanza and the playoff preview articles. I know you're furiously going through the data on that one, so I'm excited to see those ones come out. You can check out, as we mentioned last week, total points on the Sports Info Solutions blog. That's at sportsinfosolutionsblog.com. Check out the total points updates there to find out what's going on with our favorite metric here at Sports Info Solutions. And you can check out the free SIS Data Hub by visiting sisdatahub.com. That has the new game logs feature, which you can find on the site. And that is all completely free. For my co-host, Aaron Schatz, and our producer, Justin Stein, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.